Hi guys, hey everybody. Welcome to Nasedyanka, the channel where I talk about Bulgarian wisdom and history and faith. I've changed a lot of my recent videos into something more mundane but deeper in reflection. And you know what? I was thinking, what if I created a page called Mermaid Wisdom? Not as a fantasy, not as escape, but as a language for things that are difficult to say directly. Mermaids have always lived at the thresholds between the land and the sea, the body and the soul, solitude and relationship. They represent depth that cannot be rushed, claimed, or explained in any way. Mermaid wisdom is about inner waters, emotional depths, spiritual discernment, boundaries, healing, and longing that has learned containment. It is not about seduction, it is not about performance, it is about learning how to live in depth without drowning. And I'll tell you something very ordinary. This year, I decorated my Christmas tree. Hello. On January 3rd, long after the Hallmark version of Christmas, people had packed up its lights and moved on. But I didn't do it because I was late. I didn't do it because I forgot. I did it because my body finally had the space to breathe in its own rhythms. And in the Orthodox Christian tradition, we follow the Old Calendar. The Nativity actually celebrated on January 7th. So time moves differently there, not by marketing cycles, but by rhythm, fasting, waiting, readiness, patience, slowness. And something in me needed that slower time. Listening to the body matters. Rest is not laziness. Delay is not failure. Sometimes decorating the tree later is the most truthful thing that you can do in your life, to be honest. And then in Bulgaria, in our folklore, we actually have a lot of meaning around the seasons of life and the elements. So, for example, waters in Bulgaria were never empty. Rivers, springs, and seas were understood as living places inhabited by the feminine presence that carried memory, grief, beauty, and danger all at once. We have a word in Bulgarian language for mermaids that is rusalki. And so the rusalki, they actually were never evil beings. They were souls, according to our legends, whose longing had nowhere safe to land. Their danger came not from malice, not from evil, but from uncontained depth. The Samujivi, these are the wild people, were sovereign and untouchable. They healed when approached with humility and harmed when approached with hunger. But not because they wanted to do harm. Here is something very interesting how people can misunderstand boundary setting. And honestly, when somebody has depth, but somebody else lacks capacity to absorb that depth, it can come across as harm, which is unintentional. These Samudivi in Bulgaria, they were untouchable and sovereign. They healed when approached with humility. They helped people. These stories were not warnings against femininity. They were warnings against approaching depth without reverence. And when Christianity came, these stories were not erased. They were actually layered. Water became baptismal, depth became holy, but only when contained, blessed, and honored. And, this is where my inner mermaid wisdom lives. Because truth does not disappear when humans fail to embody it. The ocean is not corrupted by broken ships. In Orthodoxy, the fullness of the faith remains intact, even when clergy, authority, or communities distort it. And this matters hugely because authority can harm when it loses contact with reality, when it overrides the body, when it demands performance instead of truth, when it confuses control with order. Truth is not fragile, but you see, people are. Many souls today have been wounded by environments that spoke loudly of God while silencing conscience, embodiment, natural law. That harm matters, and still the deep remains. Mermaid wisdom does not argue theology, it listens for what endures symbolically, metaphorically. It speaks to those who can feel in their bodies when something is real and when something is performative, coercive, or disconnected from life itself. Some cultures preserve wisdom quietly, subtly. Others speak endlessly while losing contact with reality. There is grief in realizing this. And I love journaling. I've been taking notes on my grief. It feels endless, but I've come to realize that my grief is growth. It's part of growth. Especially for immigrants of culture or soul, immigrants who keep expecting depth where the waters were never taught to hold it. This grief is not rebellion. It is discernment born of fidelity. Mermaid wisdom is not anti-authority. It is rather pro-embodiment, if I can put it that way. It is not anti-culture. It is honest about incompatibility. It is not about rejecting faith. Again, it's just a symbolic representation of our subconscious tidings of our psyche. It is about recognizing when faith is lived, though, because the nervous system finally rests. And so this page is a sanctuary, a place for symbolic reflection and not a debate. For people who know that longing itself is not dangerous, only longing without containment is. So the mermaid symbol, to me, does not disappear into some sort of fantasy. She actually is the part of us that returns home into the heart. And from that home, she creates, she reflects, she waits, She loves and she speaks only when the tides are steady. And so, with all of that, I guess now I would love to tell you her story the way I reminisced and created it. I named it The Mermaid and the Tides of Time, continuing exactly as I've been reminiscing and trying to converse here with you all. So, the mermaid story, let's see if I can read you my story. Okay, here it is. I've prepared that as a note so that I can read you the story as it is. I don't want to be paraphrasing or reminiscing, and then later maybe we can wrap it up with a few extra thoughts. But here it is. I called that story The Mermaid and the Tides of Time. And it goes like this. Once upon the waters, there lived a mermaid whose home shimmered beneath the ocean, a miniature world of her own making. Tiny rooms glowed with lantern light, delicate furniture carved from coral, seashells tucked into every corner. This was a sanctuary, a place where her imagination, her heart, and her body could be together without compromise. Here, she breathed in her own rhythm, and no one could claim her, overwhelm her, or rewrite the currents of her life. Years ago, she had met a man who swam near her shores. In the shallow waters of coffee meetings, their fins brushed but never tangled too deeply. At that time, her heart was caught in another tide, bound to a stormy river she could not yet leave. The man could approach, could observe, could even admire, but he did not have to plunge into her depths. Those moments were safe, gentle, and empty of demand, and that was all either of them could sustain. But time flows, tides change, and hearts shift with the moon. The mermaid eventually freed herself from the old river, stepping into her own current, seeking clarity, honesty, and the promise of steady companionship. She reached for someone who could meet her in the depths, someone who could honor her faith, her marriage, her boundaries, and her sacred rhythms. The man who had once lingered at the edge returned, seeking depth, but he could not sustain the clarity, consistency, or commitment she required. He wavered back and forth between intensity and absence, mocking the safety she had built and the sacred currents of her home. The mermaid realized something profound. She was willing to compromise and meet love fully, but only when the tides were steady, the currents safe, and the partnership respectful. To bend too early, to give herself to someone unready, would mean losing her very self she longed to share. And so she returned to her ocean home, her miniature world glowing around her. She built towers of seashells, crafted tiny lights powered by her own clever hands, decorated it with care, and placed it where her eyes could see its joy. She poured her energy into creation, letting her hands and imagination speak where words and meetings once demanded compromise. Here she could exist fully as herself, unclaimed, unpressured, and alive in the rhythm of her own body. One day a different current approached, steady, warm, and sure. This was her husband, her companion, not of uncertainty, but of trust. With him, the mermaid discovered a new rhythm, shared currents that neither demanded her disappearance nor tested her boundaries. With him, she could swim openly, compromise freely, and deepen their connection without fear of being absorbed or overridden. He did not seek to take her, to claim her, or to rewrite her tides. He simply swam alongside her, meeting her halfway, honoring her depth, and embracing the dance of mutual respect. Through all the tides, the mermaid learned the wisdom of longing. Longing itself was not the enemy. Uncontained longing, longing that fed on uncertainty, obsession, or fantasy, was. True love, steadfast and anchored in reality, could endure distance, boundaries, and time. It did not spike or hunt or demand surrender. It existed with freedom, with solitude, and with the creative life that sustained her spirit. Even in her solitude, the mermaid was never lost. She swam through the miniature house, her decorations, and her seashell towers, connecting her imagination with her soul. She learned that her nervous system remembered the lessons of old currents. To open too widely meant risking disappearance, being overridden or claimed. And so she honored her body's wisdom, her psyche's truth, and her heart's longing for both love and containment. And as she floated beneath the sunlight glinting on the Black Sea, or listened to the music of mermaids beneath the waves, she knew love is not in losing oneself, but in being fully present, fully known, and fully anchored in reality. Her home, her currents, her husband, her boundaries, they were all part of the same dance. The mermaid had found her depth, her freedom, her steadfast heart, and the courage to compromise when love was ready to meet her there. And in that space, she could swim forever, creating, loving, and being entirely herself. As you guys probably remember, in the classic mermaid story by Hans Christian Andersen, the mermaid actually loses her voice. She actually turns into foam. She actually turns into a fairy. There is a lot of deep meaning there of transformation. And it makes me think of our Orthodox concept of the transfiguration. I will not go in too much depth around this right now, but just wanted to mention, notice how in the classical story, she actually loses her voice for love and nearly disappears into the sea foam, rather than betray her heart. And that's the moment when her sisters, the mermaids, bring her a magical dagger and tell her that she needs to get rid of her beloved, to kill his soul basically, but she refuses to commit such a crime, following her heart, following her truth. So she doesn't actually return to the waters, and she doesn't completely turn into foam. She transfigures, she becomes a fairy. It's fascinating. The depth there is profound. Nonetheless, like I said, I'll stick to my story here. But if you notice, in my mermaid story, she keeps her voice. She keeps her currents. She keeps her essence. She does not vanish for anyone else's desire. And you know what? Love is not in losing yourself. Love is in being fully present, fully known, and fully anchored, while honoring your own boundaries, your own rhythms, your own voice. Even beneath the waters, even in solitude, the mermaid thrives. And I thought that this could be symbolic and helpful to many of you, especially those of you who, perhaps like myself, love and honor tradition and depth, deep processing. And as you all, at least those of you who have followed my channel in the past, you guys know that initially I wanted this to be purely dedicated to Bulgarian culture, wisdom, and faith. And it still is, but I don't always wear my Bulgarian clothes. I have been going through personal changes and renovation and integration, a lot of integration, not loss. I'm not losing and I'm not stopping. My clothes are still there. My Bulgarian folklore and ancestral clothing are still there. It's just that I have been integrating worlds, and I've allowed my body to rest in what is. I have encountered people who were rather rude, and I get it. Not everybody has the capacity to understand the depth that comes from cross-cultural experiences, but that does not mean that I should diminish myself, or that any of you should diminish yourselves to please others and meet them there. By the way, I did take a few notes on the few nuggets on relationships, attachment, and connection that I thought I might share in this video with you. I reflected on what longing actually means and what true love, steadfast love, as I called it, is. And this was coming from a lot of pressure that I received from people and comments around kind of sort of some people judged when I shared that I needed space. Some people became very defensive or misconstrued my messages when they heard that I needed rest. Some people completely misinterpreted those as in some way of like a denial of my culture, and honestly none of it was touching on the reality of what actually had happened. So again, I wrote on this and I will share my thoughts because they may actually bring some solace and clarity to many of you. How longing transforms into steadfast love instead of obsession. Longing itself is not the enemy. Uncontained longing is. Longing becomes obsession when it has no reality check, it feeds on fantasy, it is intermittently rewarded, it substitutes intensity for intimacy, it confuses arousal with connection, it is kept alive by uncertainty. So what's crucial here to recognize is that obsession and longing needs ambiguity in order to survive. On the other hand, longing transforms into steadfast or true love when it is anchored in reality. It accepts limits, boundaries. It honors choice, yours and the others. It is not fed by pursuit or withholding. It does not require self-abandonment or self-annihilation. It can endure separation without collapse. In fact, steadfast love is less intoxicating, but more peaceful. It does not spike. It does not hunt. It does not oscillate between hope and despair. You can probably intuit what I meant here by the tides of the mermaid being pulled back and forth is very much like being tossed and turned in the storms of life. And particularly some people can toss and turn us between hope and despair. Beware of that. It says, this steadfast love says, I love you and I will not violate myself or you to prove it. This is what steadfastness and stability and consistency is about. The moment you begin setting boundaries and not engaging in obsessionality, know that this is longing maturing into love. This is why it actually can feel both sad and stabilizing within the body. That body felt sense may not be, it's no longer the panic, the anxiety, the fluttering, but yeah, it is sad. And it's also stabilizing. And you will know this if you listen to your body's nervous system in depth. And, in general, I thought of this lately. I reflected, I reminisced on the mermaid symbolism. In the Black Sea, I had a few dreams that related to the Black Sea, and when I think of it, it is a crossing point. There is a lot of history behind it. Some scientists claim that Noah's flood actually took place in that area geographically. I cannot prove it, but that's what they tell us. There are some books about this, and it fascinates me. And as I've been reminiscing, I realized that I needed to seclude myself, to pull within. I don't follow the general, like I said, the general culture's traditions. My Christmas tree arrived late. In fact, I bought it. I took it here weeks before I decorated it. It just waited for me until January 3rd. And that's okay. I don't feel pressured by that. I don't feel in any way, shape, or form uneasy about that. I just know that my body needed rest, quiet, patience, and solitude. And the mermaid symbolism for me touches on a lot of childhood memories because I did grow up by the Black Sea. That is my background. I used to go to the Black Sea almost daily when I was a child. I used to look at the sea and enter almost ritualistically as to cleanse myself from all of the unnecessary soul pollution from people's judgments and misunderstandings. And when I think of my own cultural experience here as a Bulgarian immigrant who lives in America, putting the two cultures together, that is alive between the waters and the land. And when I think of my psyche, our psyche, I think of it in the same way. We all have a subconscious and we all have a conscious reality. And the bridge is somewhere in the translation and the communication in the voice. How well can we communicate our subconsciousness to the world around us? And how well can we preserve that voice, that true essence within us without being defined and even obliterated by people's whimsies or lack of containment or insufficient containment, for lacking of better words. And so this is probably going to be enough for my presentation to you all today. Like I said, I'm just relaxing my channel here. It is Nasedyanka. It is part of the whole concept of sitting around in the circle and sharing stories, just as my ancestors did. This is very much in touch with orthodoxy, with history and tradition. One thing about orthodoxy is that it is the fullness of faith, and it does not obliterate the cultural richness of people. There is a lot that can be said to that, but instead of it, like I've heard of other denominations, and Orthodoxy is not a denomination, but I've heard of many, just spiritual, religious kind of spheres where people impose their opinions, they tell you black and white what you're supposed to do. Orthodoxy, by contrast, fulfills where you come from. It actually preserves the beauty and the truth. In fact, we say everything true is Orthodox, and that's what it stands for. There's a lot of beauty and wisdom there. I will wrap up my presentation here. For those of you who like in-depth thinking, I hope that this helped you. Share. If you don't mind, I'll be happy to hear if you could relate to my mermaid story. And I would wonder, have you ever found yourself between the tides being tossed and turned between people's expectations and your inner truth? And how did you know to follow your heart, to follow your truth? How did you know to set a boundary? How did you know to hold two truths that appear to be paradoxically incompatible, but you made the space internally within your psyche for them anyway? How did you endure? How do you typically even cope when you are on the threshold? And the threshold is when we are standing at the line between that subconsciousness and conscious realization, at the line of between our truth and other people's needs, our needs and their needs. And the danger, the trap, is in assuming that a decision must be based on either or. It's either going to be this or it's going to be that. I'm either going to live in the sea or on the land. I'm either going to only and 100% honor my subconscious psyche way of thinking, or only that which is visible, the land. But like I said, that's a trap. The reality is both together. And that's where grief lives. And that type of grief does not collapse. It does not lead to collapsing and self-obliteration. Just on the contrary, this type of grief is life. It is growth. It is the grief that feels steady and right. So yeah, feel free to share. I'll be happy. I hope this brought you some inspiration. And if you happened to be in a rush this season, whether you decorated a Christmas tree and you tried to perform for whoever the people around you are, or if your body was tired and you didn't get to decorate a Christmas tree, or if you just don't have any Christmas tree, that's okay. I just hope that this can give you hope and motivation anyways. And I will follow up in this channel again in the future. I hope this finds you well. Thank you. Bye-bye. Oh, and my lavender nettles is here. I presented my doll last time, and she is my little companion. So she has been helping me with decorating our tree. So if you can tap into your inner child and use some creativity, do not be afraid to be playful and creative, to tap into the depths of beauty and metaphors and symbolism that can be extremely nourishing to the soul. Bye-bye.